So in a lot of my Google searches for Angular, this site Alligator.io has been coming up. And one of the nice things about this site is it has this fun little indicator where as I scroll, you can see that we get this progress bar across the top, which is simply indicating how far through the document I've scrolled. And I think that's a fun little delighter, and I also thought it would be an interesting experiment to try and recreate that in Angular with RxJS streams. Mostly because I don't have a lot of experience with RxJS, and this seemed like a nice way to start to get my feet a bit more wet. So here's my Angular 6 demo, and as I scroll down, you'll see that I get this little scrolling indicator along the top. Now this scrolling indicator is for the parent document, but as you'll see, I also have an embedded element that has an overflow auto producing a scroll bar here with the fixed height. And as I scroll through this, you can see that this element also has that scrolling indicator. So what I wanted to do was create some service that would provide an abstraction for scroll percentage, and then I could apply that abstraction to either the document or to a particular element embedded within the Angular application. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. So first, let's look at our app component to see how we can consume this particular service. Now, again, I have an embedded element here that has a fixed height, and you can see that the embedded element has its own scroll bar, and the document is being monitored as well, and the document has its scroll bar. And both of these are essentially just feeding into the width of this indicator, and we're going to use this inner scroll and page scroll variables. So let's see where we get those values from. So with the app component, I'm injecting this element scroll percentage service, and this is the service that actually provides the RxJS stream that we'll subscribe to that emits scroll percentage values. And in the initialization of the component, you can see I'm taking the scroll percentage, I'm getting the scroll as a stream, so this is going to be returning that RxJS stream. I'm not telling it to monitor any particular element, so in this case it's going to default to the document. And then I simply subscribe to that, and it's going to start emitting those percentages. And then I'm just piping that into page scroll. Now we also have this record inner scroll method for that embedded element, right? For this one down here, which we're also storing as a value. But let's take a look at where this is coming from. So if we scroll back up to the template, you can see that we're calling record inner scroll from an event handler on the DOM itself. And it turns out that this attribute, scroll percentage, is a directive selector for a directive that glues that element scroll percentage service to the host element of this particular directive. So we have two ways of getting this stream of events. One is explicitly through a getScrollAsStream method, and then one is implicitly as an event emitter on a directive. So let's take a look at the service to see how that works. So here's the element scroll percentage, and here is that getScrollAsStream method that we saw being called explicitly from within our app component, and it's going to receive a target which defaults to document. And if we scroll back up to the top here, we can see that this target is either expecting a document node or an element node. The getScrollAsStream method is then essentially turning around, creating an RxJS stream, and returning it. Now I'm creating an RxJS stream from two different sources here based on the type of node I'm monitoring. And this is because if I'm looking at a element node, then I can view the scroll event on the node and get the scroll position from the same node. If I'm monitoring the document, I actually have to get the scroll event from the window and then monitor the document. This should actually be node here. I kind of messed this up in the code, but it's already committed, so it's the same thing, right? Node would just be the same reference as document in this case. So you can see I'm using RxJS to actually create the cold stream of source events, and then I'm mapping that from scroll events to scroll percentages. Now the most difficult part of this was actually doing all of the math to figure out what the current scroll of the particular target was, whether it's the document or the element. And special shout out to JavaScript Info, who had some great little insights on calculating that in a cross-browser compatible way. But overall, right, there's not a whole lot going on here. It's basically some inspection of the DOM state and then some emitting of stream values. Now, if we jump over to the directive, we can see that the directive becomes just some really lightweight glue that binds the element scroll percentage service to a particular host element in the Angular application, right? So our directive here, which is again binding to that attribute scroll percentage and also exposing an output event emitter on scroll percentage, is really doing little more than getting the element reference, getting the scroll percentage service, and then binding the two together in the ng-on-init. The ng-on-init here, you can see, calls the same method that we call in our app component, get scroll as stream, except in this case, instead of defaulting to document, I'm providing the native element, the host element associated with the directive, as the target here. So it's going to start monitoring, it's going to generate an RxJS cold stream for this element as opposed to one for the document. And then just as I did in the app component, I'm going to subscribe to it, get the percent values as they're being emitted from the RxJS stream, and then I'm going to pipe those into our event emitter output. I always feel like maybe there's something I can do here to simplify this, like potentially just exposing this stream directly as the event emitter, but I don't know, the timing of it seems weird because when I have an event emitter, I can instantiate it within my constructor, but then notice that I don't actually create the RxJS stream until my ng-on-init. So if I try to expose my RxJS stream as the event emitter, then we get like a little bit of a weird timing where that stream is actually null or undefined before I get to my ng-on-init, and that changes kind of the expectation of the component, so on and so forth. But that's something I might explore in a subsequent post. But you'll see that here, if the directive is destroyed, then I'm simply unsubscribing from that RxJS stream, which, because I'm using the from event, will automatically unsubscribe from the scroll events when anything downstream unsubscribes from the resultant stream, which is, of course, you know, some of the real power and the beauty of an RxJS stream. So, all in all, fun experiment. I'm starting to get my head wrapped around RxJS a little bit more. That's definitely also in part to reading Functional Light by Kyle Simpson, which I'll post a review of when I'm done shortly. And anyway, that's really all there is to it. And just to quickly recap, in this case, to view the document, I'm getting the get scroll as stream here with no explicit target, which allows the service to default to document. When I'm in the directive, I'm calling the same exact method, except this time I'm providing the native element so that it knows to monitor a specific element within the DOM. Ultimately, I'm just subscribing to those RxJS streams, emitting a percentage, and then I'm piping that percentage back into the application template. So in this case, right, page scroll or inner scroll, which then gets parlayed into some style attributes on this visual indicator, both for the element and for the document. So there you go. I guess I should, the one other thing I wanted to say was actually, so right now this RxJS stream is just emitting events in real time, meaning as the user scrolls, every scroll event that gets emitted gets mapped and emitted to the calling context. And of course, every time that happens, we get a change digest being applied. So one thing that I had tried to play around with was actually sort of throttling these scroll events that come through, but I could not get that to work. It never seemed to emit the last event, which always left the scroll bar not in, it left the state of the scroll indicator not matching the actual state of the scroll bar in the document or the element. It seemed to be losing events. So if anyone has any suggestions there on how I might throttle that or debounce that in a way that I get kind of the first and last event all the time, that would be great, because that would also help me learn about RxJS. Anyway, fun experiment, and hopefully this is interesting.